Alright, so I think everybody's about joined, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of get started here. So today we're talking about watering tips, tricks, and tools. So I'm going to go through kind of a list of different things that we're going to go through, and then I'll bring up some tools. I got some stuff around me that I'm going to show you to kind of help you water. So summer is officially here, and I think we all kind of feel those temps rising, and we all say to ourselves, I got to get out there and water. I got to protect my plants. I got to make sure that they're okay. Protect my investment, make sure that they bloom, make sure that we're doing everything correctly. And watering is probably the #1 reason that our gardens succeed or don't succeed. So watering is a very, very important thing that we can do and that we can control. And what I like to do is I like to break this down into 5 W's. So the who, what, where, when, and why. And we'll go through those very, very quickly, and that way we can get to the how. So you got to understand the 5 W's. You got to understand the who, why, what, when, where, and why to understand how to water. So I really think that's an important thing to do, is to kind of discuss those so you understand when and where and what and who to and how to water. And then we get to the how and really discuss that. So it really, we'll go through that first part as quickly as I possibly can, and then get to the how to water, because I think that's the most important thing. I also think that probably one of the most important things about watering is making sure that it's efficient, somewhat fun. So I know a lot of us probably think of watering and go, oh, I don't want to have to get out there and do that. But if we can make it efficient and effective, then it'll make you more successful, and it'll make your garden more successful, and your landscape and your plants happier. So if we can be very, very efficient, it saves you time, it saves you money. And if it's effective and it's doing what we want it to do, then you're going to be better off for it, and you're being more successful. So that's probably the most important part of all of this, is making sure that we're watering, #1, and then understand why we're doing it. So let's go ahead and start on my 5 W's. So we're going to start with who. So who else would it be other than you? You're going to water. Now, Mother Nature helps out as well, rain, but you can't always count on the rain. And so that's the tricky part, is we can't always rely on a rain storm. So what we always do is we kind of joke around here at the garden center. People say, why are you watering? It's going to rain. If I don't water, it won't rain. So as long as, so we always kind of joke about that because we think it's kind of funny. People always say, why are you watering? There's a storm cloud right there. It's coming this way. And we always say, if we didn't have the hoses out and we weren't actively watering, then that rain cloud would just miss us intentionally, it seems like. So don't rely on the rain. If you see rain in the forecast and your plants can make it, then definitely give it a day, see if it does rain. But don't always count on it raining. I think if you live in Hampton Roads or wherever you live, you probably have experienced those popcorn storms, those pop-up little storms, and sometimes you get some, sometimes you don't. And then how much rain is that? So we'll talk about that too. But who is doing the watering? You are. So it's very important to understand that you're in control of this, and so you got to make sure to water. If we can get our plants established and get them going and get the root system developed very quickly, then you won't have to water as much. And that's what we're going to kind of discuss here, is how to kind of accomplish that. So who's doing it? You are. What are we watering? We're watering all of our plants. So trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, houseplants, hanging baskets, containers. There's some specific things, obviously, that we'll talk about. When I get to the how part at the very end, I'll talk about some specific things. I'll talk about houseplants, how to water houseplants. I'll talk about how to water your trees and shrubs, your landscape plants, how to water containers and hanging baskets. And I'll give you lots of tools and tips and tricks as well, along with that. But there's some specific things too that you need to know, and we'll talk about those again more in the how section. But like lawns, for example. I'll talk about lawns in a little bit of detail here when we get to that section. But lawns, are specific to what type of lawn you're growing. We're a transitional zone, so you can grow lots of different types of lawns here. You can grow some very drought-tolerant lawns like Bermuda or St. Augustine, but you also might grow fescue, and fescue struggles in our hot season, in our summer months. And so knowing how to water effectively really helps. But what you're watering is important too. Broadleaf evergreens, conifers. So when we talk about like evergreens, those types of plants might need a little bit more water. Different things like hollies that might not show you signs that they need a water. So I'll talk about that again more in the how. Anything planted this year. So anything that you've planted really from January 1st to now, or really anything within a year. So if it was really planted in August, we're trying to get it through a year. If we can get a plant through the year in the ground, typically is what I'm talking about, then once you get it through a whole season, a whole year, then you know you're pretty much acclimated. And so that's what we're trying to get accomplished. And then that will get us to the how section. All right, so where are we watering? Where are we watering? So like I said, I'm going to breeze through these. Who, you, what, our plants. Where are we watering? We're watering the root system. We always water the root system of plants. I can't stress that more. I think that's super, super important. Watering the leaves of plants is not recommended. If a plant has roots, which all of them do, they all absorb moisture through the roots. Very few plants actually take moisture in through their leaves. So very few plants are actually going to take moisture in through their leaves. They're always going to take them in through their roots. So if you're ever curious as to knowing which plants do take it in through their leaves, you can look that up. But it's not many. And if they have roots, then that's where they want the water. That's where they're going to absorb the moisture. So always water the root system, never water the leaves. Dampness and darkness cause fungus. And we'll talk about that in the wind section, but we don't want to get our leaves damp. So we always want to water our root system and not our leaves. So that's very, very important. We also want to water in the drip line. So we want to water in our drip section. So that's our if I'm a shrub, if I'm a plant, let me pull this up. This will be a good way of showing that. So here's a shrub, here's a gold mop cypress. If this were in the ground where these branches are out here on the end, as the rain hits this, the water hits and collects and drips down off the edge. This is the section called its drip line. So underneath the ground, this is where the feeder roots are going to be. This is where the roots are that are going to absorb the moisture. So that's actually where we want to water. So you don't want to water right directly in the center of the plant. We always want to water in the drip line if we can. So especially important if we're watering a tree. So if we're watering a big tree, a Crape Myrtle per se, or any other tree that might be 20 feet high or 20 feet wide, that drip line is where those branches hang. So that's where that plant is actually absorbing moisture. So that's important to note as well, is where you're watering. So watering the root system, don't water the leaves, that'll cause fungus and the spread of disease, and water in the drip line, and that's where we're watering. Now, when do we water? This is another important thing. We always want to try and water in the morning if we can. Watering in the morning is the best time. Plants need the moisture throughout the entire part of the warm part of the day. So as that sun comes up and as the temperatures rise through the middle part of the day, you'll have the moisture ready. So if you're watering in the evening, while it might be more enjoyable for you, the difficulty of watering in the evening is it sits in that moisture. It's not using that moisture all the way through the nighttime. And then in the morning, there might not be as much of it left. It might have gone through the soil level and gone deeper down in the soil. So it might not be able to be reached by the root system. So we always want to water in the morning. It's a really good practice to start. Now, if we got to water in the afternoon, we got to do it. If we love to sleep in, or maybe we work nights, or whatever it might be. But we always want to water in the morning if we can. If we have to water other parts of the day, I'm not saying don't do it. Just try and get used to watering in the morning. And that goes for everything. I mean, that literally goes for everything. And that's where it gets that dampness and darkness. If we've got a lot of damp soil or damp leaves, which again, I hope you're not watering your leaves now, we always want to water the root system. But if we've got dampness and darkness, that causes fungus and disease. So we always kind of want a little bit of a drier situation if we can get it at nightfall. Now, again, you're probably all saying to yourself, well, what if it rains? Well, rainwater is different. Rainwater is nature's gift. So rainwater doesn't cause as many issues as our tap water could. And if we're watering leaves or if we're watering plants at night, it can just cause those issues of dampness and darkness, which can cause fungus. So again, we're controlling it. Who's doing it? You are. So make sure that you're doing it at the right time, and the morning is the best time. I always tell people, especially when they first come to work here at the garden center, is to start in your sunniest spots. It'll make it more enjoyable for you. So if you can get out there early in the morning and water in the morning, which is what I hope you can do because I think that's very important, start in the very sunniest spots. Start in your full sun areas or where the sun is in the morning. Because while that is the warmest spot, those plants are going to need the moisture sooner, and then you work your way into a shadier location. Not only one, because the plants in the shady spot don't need the moisture as quickly, but also it'll make it more enjoyable for you. So if you're watering for, let's say, a couple hours, it depends on how many plants you have. Here we have a lot of plants, so what I always tell people, start in the full sun area. It'll take you a couple hours to get to the shade, but by the time you get to the shady areas, at least when and the temperatures have risen, and the temperatures are rising throughout the morning time, at least you get into the shade and you can protect yourself, and those plants can wait a little bit longer to get that moisture. So that's I think a very helpful tip that it was taught to me, so I just wanted to extend that to you, which is start in the sun, work your way to shade. I think that really, really helps. Wilting. So wilting doesn't always, so when we're talking about when do we water, wilting plants need water. So that's a great sign that we need to water. And so we always want to water when we see wilting plants, but we want to check too. Wilting doesn't always mean that your plant is dry. So let me show you a good example of this. I went out there and grabbed this before our team could get out there and start watering, and they were like, no, let me water it. But this is what a wilting plant looks like. As you can see, it's wilting. So what I can do before I go and water this plant is think about two different things. One is it wet? So I'll check the soil. It's dry, so I know it's not. So I know that it's dry, so I know that it needs to be watered. So this plant is wilting because it's dry. Now, if I check the soil and it was really, really wet, super, super wet, then I would say this plant really needs to dry out. It's wilting, it's struggling. And what happens sometimes is if we water too much, then the root system can get what we call root rot, and root rot can cause the plant to wilt as well. And the only way to kind of solve that is to let it dry out the best that you possibly can, so try not to water it. Now, root rot can happen, and it can kill plants, but then we can learn from those issues and say, well, maybe we need to do a different plant that can take more moisture, especially if it's a wet area, or maybe we just watered it too much, and we know now not to water too much. But a plant that's wilting doesn't always mean that it's dry. Now, this plant is. But if it were super, super wet, then I would say let this thing dry out. Let's let it dry out. Now also, wilting can occur when temperatures are very, very high in the middle part of the day when the sun is at its highest. Wilting can occur. Plants are protecting themselves. So if you go out there at let's say 1 or 2 o'clock and your plant is hanging and wilting a little bit, but you check the soil, you water it in the morning, and it looks fairly moist, then you might say, let me give this a little bit of time. Let's see if when the sun kind of passes at 5 or 6 or 7 o'clock, maybe that plant will stand back up, and it should, and it most likely will. You see it a lot with tomatoes, so if you've ever grown tomato plants, they'll probably wilt almost every day on you, and I urge you not to go out there and water them unless the soil is very, very dry. So the best tester is right here, your finger. Go out there and check that soil. If it's moist in the top 2 to 3 inches, you don't need to water it. It's just protecting itself. Plants, when they have big leaves on it, so let me put this plant down. If you got a big leaf on a plant, then that's absorbing a lot of that heat. And so when it's very, very hot outside and they're trying to protect themselves, they can sometimes fold up or they'll wilt a little bit. And that's just to kind of decrease the surface space and allow that plant to recover. So that's, I think, a very helpful thing to understand is when plants are wilting doesn't always mean that it needs water. Could be too much water, could be it's just a very extreme part of the day, and you know you watered it well in the morning, so you're probably okay. So again, kind of that really I think helps when we talk about when. Now, let's get into the why. Why are we watering? So watering is important for transpiration in plants. We'll get into a little bit of science here. So transpiration is the process that the plant goes through to cool themselves down during extreme heats, or during really any part of the year. It's always going through transpiration, but it's the process of taking the moisture from the root system up through the plant and actually releasing it through the leaves that cools the plant. And so that's really the main source of watering the plant, is to help keep the plant cool, and it does that process through transpiration. And so that is one of the main reasons that plants need water. Now they also need water to allow nutrients, obviously, to flow through the system. Water doesn't necessarily make plants grow. It's how the water takes the nutrients through the plant that makes the plant grow. So nutrients and minerals flow through the plant by the way of water, and as the water works its way through the system of the plant, that's what allows those nutrients and those minerals to get into the plant and make the plant grow. And then through transpiration is how they cool themselves. And that's also how they lose water. So they're using water, losing it through transpiration, and using the water to produce those or get those minerals and nutrients through the plant so that it can grow. So I think that's kind of important to kind of know. I know that's a little bit scientific. Again, make sure to water your plants. It's very, very important. It's vital. When plants wilt, why do we water? When plants wilt, so if I didn't get out there and water this plant right after the seminar, what's going to happen is, let's say I get to it tonight or I get to it tomorrow morning. This plant now is going to lose some nutrients in some of these leaves. It can't handle this, and so it's going to turn yellow. A lot of leaves are going to turn yellow in this plant if I keep waiting and waiting and waiting to water it. So that means a lot of these leaves are going to defoliate, it's going to lose some leaves, and eventually what can actually happen is what we call terminal wilt. Terminal wilt sounds like a scientific term, and it sounds horrible, but what terminal wilt really is the root system of a plant gets so dry that the root system, that part of that root system dies. Now maybe not the entire plant dies, but a portion of the root system can die, and then that plant can't absorb as much moisture as it used to be able to. And then you lose some plants, and you lose that process of transpiration, that process of moving nutrients and minerals through the plant. And so you're going to lose a little bit of the plant. And then if it gets really bad where the entire root system dries out, then we can have terminal death. So that's what we're trying to avoid, is not letting our plants get too dry for too long. So that's very, very important to understand that. Let's see, so I think that kind of covers the why, really. So we're doing it for transpiration. We're doing it to allow the plant to grow through the process of moving the minerals and the nutrients through the plant. Very important to understand. Let's not let our plants wilt too long because it can cause damage, especially if they're dry. So that's really the who, what, where, when, and why. So let's run through it real quick again, because I really want you to understand these 5 W's, because then I'm going to get into the how, and the how is going to take some time to really kind of describe the how. So the who, you are watering. Mother Nature will help here and there. She's been good to us this year here in Hampton Roads, but across the country, you never know. So who is watering? You are. What are we watering? We're watering our plants. We're watering our trees, shrubs, annuals, containers, indoor plants, outdoor plants. Everything that's got a root system, we're watering. Where are we watering? We're watering the root system. We're never watering the leaves. That can cause disease and the spread of fungus. So we don't want to do that. We're always watering the root system of our plants. When are we watering? I want you to try and water in the morning as best as you can. So we always want to try and water in the morning. And then why are we watering? To keep the plants healthy and keep the plants active and keep that process of transpiration going so that it can keep itself cool and survive during extreme droughts or during other different periods. So now that we understand the 5 W's, let's talk about how we're going to water. So how are we watering? So my motto is always, my motto that I've always kind of stuck with is water heavy, less often. So I want you to I'm going to say it probably multiple times, but water deep, less often. Water heavy, less often. So we're encouraging plants to develop a deeper root system. So let me explain that, because I think when I explain this to most people, a kind of a light bulb goes off in their head. And specifically I'm really talking about in the ground plants. I'm going to get to those specifics here in a minute. But what I kind of always tell people is, if you go out there and water your plants, especially in your landscape, real quick, and you just go out there and hit them, they'll probably make it through the day. But if you don't do it tomorrow, they're going to wilt, for sure. And if you do it every day, and you go out there and water it real quick every day, you're fooling the root system, you're tricking the root system. It thinks it's living in an area where it gets a little bit of water every day. And so the root system's not going to search for water. It's going to stay right there at the surface. It's going to say, I know I'm going to get a little bit of water every day. I'm not going to search for it. I've been getting it. And then all of a sudden, you stop watering. So we always tell people to water. I'll talk about this in a minute. For 2 to 3 weeks after we plant something. For sure, we definitely want to water through that period. So if you go out there and give it a little bit of water for 2 or 3 weeks, and then you stop, that root system hasn't developed. It's sitting there saying, I'm going to get it every day. And then all of a sudden you stop, and it might make it through the next day, but that 3rd day, 4th day, 5th day, it's going to really suffer. And that's because we haven't forced it to develop a root system. So that's what I want to encourage by watering deep, less often. And what I mean by that is I want you to really soak your plants, especially in the landscape. I'm going to talk about that when I get to that portion, which will be just in a minute. But I really want you to give a deep watering. And what that's going to do is give it plenty of water to drink. And then I want you to not water for 2 or 3 or 4 days, depending on the plant, depending on the plant type, depending on where you planted it, all those different things. Lots of different variables in this situation for sure. But I want you to water deep less often. Then what's going to happen is you're going to give it plenty of moisture to work with. So we're giving it lots and lots of moisture. But then in that drying out period, in that 2, 3, 4 day time frame, the roots are going to start to search for water. They're going to start to say, I got to find this, I got to find it myself. And as those roots start to look out for water, then that's how we develop a root system. And then what we can do is we're making those roots dig in, search for water, and that'll get a plant established much faster. And it's going to save you a lot of time. Instead of even having to get out there every single day and think about watering, I want you to water heavier, less often. It's going to push those plants to search for their own water. That's what we're trying to do, especially when we're talking about landscape plants. So I think that really, really helps understand the point of watering. So let me get into some of those specifics. The first thing I want to talk about, I'm not going to go right into the landscape plants, the in-ground plants. I'm going to go into containers and hanging baskets, because I think a lot of us do that. I mean, I definitely do. Love my hanging baskets, love my annual combos. I got some trees in containers. So you can grow lots and lots of different things in pots. A lot of people do vegetable gardening in pots. Herbs in a window basket. So you know, there's so many different things that we're growing in containers these days, but we got to make sure to water them. Now, containers are always going to dry out much faster than anything in the ground. And why is that? Well, they're going to get hit by the wind harder. Evaporation is going to occur a little bit faster, and they're going to heat up faster. They're above ground. Ground temperatures stay much cooler than above ground. So if I've got a pot sitting above ground, then I know that they're going to dry out a little bit faster. So that's a very important thing to know, is that they're going to dry out a little bit quicker when we're above ground. So we want to water those. And so we want to make sure we water those in the morning again, so that it has the moisture throughout the day, and we need to water them correctly. So here's what I'm going to get into, a little bit of the tools of the trade, so that you're equipped with the right equipment to make your job a little bit easier, and I'll also give some tips and tricks along the way. So the first thing, obviously, if we're watering outside, I'm talking about outside here. I'll get into houseplants here in a second. But outdoors in containers, whether it's a vegetable garden, whether it's a hanging basket, whether it's our annual combos, whether it's a Japanese maple in a pot, whatever it may be. If it's got a pot, if it's in a pot, then we're watering it. So the first thing, of course, we need to do is get water there. So there is one option, a pretty easy option, a watering can. So watering cans, of course, work very well. This is just a 2-gallon watering can. It's a nice, good size. You know, it's not going to be too heavy that you're going to have a problem carrying it around your yard. So if you're only doing 1 or 2 things around the yard, this might be a good option. It's got a sprinkler head. I also like to pop this off and just use the watering spout, because it kind of gets it direct. Whenever we talk about watering, I want you to water the root system and not the leaves. So this sprinkle of this cap doesn't do me much good. So I typically take that off personally. That's just me personally. And then I can get it right to the root system. So I can go right into the plant and get it right down to the root system and give it a nice drink of water. So watering cans are essential. It's a tool that I think is a must. You should have it around, especially because sometimes one plant will dry up a little bit faster than another. So maybe when you go out and water your yard every 2 or 3 or 4 days, you're watering your containers. Maybe there's one in there that needs a little bit extra water and needs to get it at different times throughout the week that doesn't fit into your normal schedule, and that happens a lot. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more when we get into houseplants. Don't always get set into a schedule. I want to make this efficient for you, but not always are you going to be able to do that. And if a plant gets wilting every other day, you might need to transport water there real quick. Now, if we're getting out there and we're watering and everything, then we need a hose for sure. Number one thing is a hose. So I got my hoses here, and I like to show you the different types of hoses. Here at the garden center, we have been through lots of different types of hoses. We use hoses every single day. They're a vital part of our job. And so what I learned when I worked here is whatever we're using must be good. So now it's what we sell is what we use. And for years and years and years, we use that 8-ply hose. It's a good hose, and we probably all of us at home have that normal hose. Well, these lightweight hoses have been coming out, and this one is called 0G. 0G hose is awesome, awesome, awesome hose. We've been through a lot of testing here at the garden center, but let me show it to you. So it's this kind of fabric wrapped hose. It's a really industrial strength hose, really nice fittings on it as well. So it's a really easy hose to use, very, very lightweight. This is not one of those pocket hoses that are going to crinkle up into a small form. This is a 50-foot hose. It's not super, it's very, very light for a 50-foot hose, but they're so easy to work with. When you don't feel like you're having to tug something across the yard, it never kinks on us. It's very, very easy. It's very, very durable. It is my favorite go-to hose nowadays. And you're going to start seeing us using these in all of our stores, our garden markets. It's the hose that we're switching over to because we have tested it. We believe in it. It is an awesome, awesome hose. Very lightweight, very easy to use. So I can't stress how much I really love this hose, but it's a great one. And we carry it at both of our year-round locations here in Virginia Beach. It's a great one. So check this one out. If you need a new hose, convert to this because it is the best one. I highly, highly recommend it. Also, there's a lot of different types of hoses out there, and I'm not any hose that you love is fine by me. But this is another nice one. If you got a smaller yard, this is a great one for boats or for small yards, or if you're working in a community garden or whatever it might be. This is a great little 60-foot hose, very, very lightweight. It does have some expanding capabilities, but it comes in this nice little waterproof bag. But it's a really nice hose, very, very lightweight, very, very easy to use. Got nice fittings on it, very easy to use. It's a little bit of a smaller, thinner hose, but it does expand a little bit. So when we turn the water spigot on, this will expand a little bit. And also comes with a little handy little nozzle here. So we'll talk about those in a minute. But this works great if we're doing small plants, if we can get it right down to the root system. Again, most of us that use these, unfortunately, are spraying over top of our plants. And that's what we don't want. We don't want to spray the leaves again. So great for washing cars. Great for spraying off, the concrete after a job or something. Do their job. They've got a couple different functions on it. Jet, the shower. I like the shower mode because it's a nice soft watering. But it's good if you're up on your deck or porch or patio and you're just watering directly into pots, as long as you can get it right to the root system. Great little tool. But this is another great little hose. It's something that you can carry around with you, take from place to place if you need to. But also a very lightweight one. I use this one when I'm watering my vegetable garden. I have that one very close to that. It's very easy to kind of work around my vegetables. And then I got my 0G hose out there in the yard to water everything else because it's lightweight. I can connect a bunch of them together. They come in 50-foot and 100-foot sizes, so just so you know that. But two really good hoses there that I just want to discuss. But again, the hose is up to you. It's whatever you're used to. I just really recommend that if you do need a new hose, you get the 0G. You will love this hose. It is awesome. So then I also, whenever I talk about watering, I always talk about this tool. Again, this is one of those things that here at the garden center, if you ever see us watering, we've got one of these in our hands. And so I can't stress how important I think this tool is. It'll save you a ton of back pain. It's just an awesome, awesome tool, and it's our Dram watering wand. So this thing is awesome. I mean, it's been around for a long time. It really is sold as a tool for garden centers to use. But I said to myself, when I was the buyer, and I'm the buyer, I said to myself, if we're using it, our customers should be using it because it really is the best way for us to water here at the garden center. So it's got to be a great way for us to water at home. So, and it is awesome. So here's the functionality of it. It's 30 inches, so it's a nice length. So you can stand and water directly to the ground. So we can water the root systems of plants very easily. We can water hanging baskets very easily. We can reach up, get it into a hanging basket very easily. It's got an on and off valve on it. So it's just an awesome, awesome tool. Very easy to use. And it's going to save you so much time. And I'm going to show this multiple times throughout this discussion about watering. So Dram watering wand, if you don't have one, you need to get one. It is awesome. It is super, super simple. And it's just a great tool to help you water. It's going to make you more efficient. It's going to make it more enjoyable. And if like I said, if we're using it, it's because it works. So definitely want to try and get one of these. Dram watering wands are available at all of our year-round locations, and we have some of it at our markets as well, our 10 locations across Hampton Roads. So really, really great tool. Dram watering wand. All right, so back to our plants. So we're talking about watering our plants. We can use a watering can. We've got a good hose now. We've got our watering wand, and so now we can start watering. So again, in the summer months, we're typically watering our containers at least every other day. We might need to be watering every day, depending on the temperature, depending on the location. We want to make sure our pots always have drainage holes. That's another important thing, is making sure that our pots have a hole in the bottom so that they're allowing moisture out. Now, pots are easy because our water is contained within that pot. So whenever I plant up a container, I always give myself a little bit of a reservoir around the top, a little bit of a lip, about a 1 to 2 inch lip, so that you can collect your water in there. So when I water a plant, I can get the water in there, it can fill up a little bit, it can sink through and go out the holes. So we want to make sure we got drainage holes, we want to make sure we're watering, and then we always, of course, want to test the soil to make sure if we need to water. And a great tool, again, is your finger or a moisture meter. Moisture meters are really great little tools to have around. This one's awesome because it's a 3-in-1, so it's also pH, moisture, and light. So it really is a great tool for especially our indoor plants. So whenever I sell an indoor plant, if you're a brand new indoor plant parent, taking care of your indoor plants, this is kind of a must-have. It kind of helps kind of get you used to how you should be watering, what kind of light that your plant might need, and your pH. So it's a great little tester. Is it 100% accurate? No, but it is a great little tool to have around, and it really kind of gets you right in the range, especially when we talk about pH or light. Gets you in the right range. Moisture, great. It'll tell you if it's wet, dry, or moist, and typically we'll want to be in that moist range. So this is a great way, or again, you've got a great tool right there with you, your finger. So always just check your soil, just stick your finger down in there. Okay, it's moist, I don't need to water it today. You can also check by weight. Sometimes if your plants are in plastic pots or hanging baskets, I always like to go out to my hanging basket and just kind of pick it up a little bit. It's got some weight to it. I don't need to water it right now. Now, when we're watering containers, this is my last tip that I will tell you. It's especially important with hanging baskets, but I think it's important to know with all plants, is we don't want to sit there and just water so much that water is just flushing out the bottom. If I got a ton of water and it's just running out the bottom, guess what's also running out with it? Plant food, if we fed it, minerals, nutrients, all those good things that are in soil. We don't want to flush all that out. So if we're using a plant food and you're sitting there watering your container to the point where it's just draining water through it, all of those nutrients, all those minerals, all of that plant food that you put in there is running out those bottom holes as well. So we don't want to water that. We want to get pretty good at watering, and this will happen over time, just learning from how we're watering. We want to get pretty good at watering to the point where it's not running through those holes. And especially important in hanging baskets. Not so, not crazy important with our containers. So if we're doing like a large pot on our front porch, typically you've got soil all the way down the bottom. I hope you do. I think that's important. So you got soil all the way down the bottom. Maybe you got a layer of rock down there at the bottom. But it's going to take a fair amount of water to flush that full out of nutrients. But if we're talking about vegetable gardening, those nutrients are super important. So we want to keep them in there. So I want you to get pretty good at watering, so to the point where you're watering it enough, but it's not running a ton of water out the bottom. Hanging baskets usually have a thin kind of layer in there, almost like a water reservoir down at the bottom. And so what typically happens with hanging baskets is you water them, and then you just keep watering and watering and watering until you see all that water pouring out the bottom. It happens to a lot of people that come to work with us. I always tell them, don't water. You want to get pretty good at watering, especially your hanging baskets. It's kind of a challenge. I always took watering as a challenge. Let me see if I can master this. It is a tricky thing to master. But let's see if I can water my hanging baskets so that it holds that moisture but doesn't drain out of the bottom. Let me see if I can get it through an entire day or 2 days with enough water, but that I'm not draining it out the bottom of the pot. So I challenge you to try that. I think that really helps. If you can do that, that's great. If you're watering to the point where it's just dripping a little bit out the bottom, that's perfect. But if you're watering to the point where everything's just flowing out the bottom, then that is not great. That is ruining, or that's taking all the nutrients and all the plant food that you might be putting in there, and it's rushing it through the bottom of the pot. Now, containers and hanging baskets can dry out very significantly, so the fact that the soil actually will pull away from the walls of the pot. We might even be able to see it here on my dry plant. So let's see. So if this comes out very easily, then that hasn't quite done it yet. But sometimes plants will pull away, the soil will actually pull away from the wall of the pot and create almost like a cake, almost create like a brick of soil. And so that can happen And when you get a brick of soil, you might have to do a little bit of extra watering just to loosen it up enough to absorb moisture. So if we've let our plants go a little too dry for a little too long, then we might go and soak it in some water. That's why I love saucers. So let's see, did I grab a saucer? Yeah. So you can take a saucer, water your plant, let the saucer fill up with water. That water will get wicked back up into that dry soil. Now, I'm going to tell you, don't always do that. That is not recommended. But that will help if you've got a very, very dry root ball. Some people, especially indoor plants, when I get into the indoor plant section, will take them to the sink and just keep on putting a little bit of water in there to keep eventually kind of loosen up that brick and get it to absorb moisture again. But that's a good way. Saucers are designed to protect your deck, porch, patio, your indoor furniture. That's what they're designed to do, to protect stuff, not to have water sitting in them and feeding water up to the plants. Again, imagine, or I should say, this is what I always say to people. Whenever you have moisture sitting in a saucer for too long, so if you got saucers on your outdoor pots, make sure to drain them, because imagine standing in a tub for 2 days. Your feet would rot off. So just like a plant, if the plant is sitting in a puddle of water for too long, then those little roots that are actually coming out of the bottom of the pot that you may not see are going to get root rot and cause diseases or cause an issue with the plant dying over time. So we don't want to sit in moisture for too long. But if we've gotten out of control and our plants have gotten way too dry and our soil has become a brick, it might help it loosen over time. But what I typically tell people to do is water it a little bit. What typically is going to happen is the water is going to drain down through the outside very quickly. Go back, water it again, keep on hitting it until you've loosened it up. Again, you've got a great tool right there in your finger so you can kind of check that moisture level and see if it's holding moisture. But sometimes if we let it go too far, we got to make sure to kind of bring that soil back to life and bring it back to a point where it can absorb moisture rather than it just working down the side walls. So that's what happens when that brick of soil forms, that the soil pulls away from the side wall of the pot, and when you water it, the water just goes right down the outside and right out the holes. And you might have thought that you watered it, but you didn't. So you need to go back and hit it and hit it and hit it until you get that soil to loosen up so that it can absorb moisture. I think that's important to know. All right, so let's move on to houseplants. So it kind of is a good, easy transition because we talked about a lot of things there with our containers. Outside, whether they be hanging baskets or combo containers or vegetable gardens or whatever they may be. Now we're going to talk about houseplants, which can become kind of a tricky subject. Most indoor plants like a wet-dry cycle. So what's a wet-dry cycle? Wet-dry cycle means we water it and we let it dry out. Very simple. Almost all indoor plants prefer that. Now there are some plants that might like a more moist situation, like ferns. So ferns, for example, like an evenly moist soil. So those we're going to have to watch and kind of watch a little bit more and kind of keep checking with our finger, make sure that we don't let them get too dry because they can get damaged fairly quickly if they get too dry. But most plants like a wet-dry cycle, and that's a very easy cycle to follow inside. Water it, let it dry out. Always ask us what the watering requirements are for a plant. We can always tell you, do a little bit of research, but definitely ask us if you have any questions about your indoor plants so that we know how much water. Don't get on a schedule. I mentioned this before. Do not get on a schedule and say, I'm going to water all my houseplants every Saturday. That's not great because all plants need different requirements of water. As I just mentioned, ferns might need a little bit more. Indoor, other dracaenas or different bacchias or different types of plants will need different watering requirements. So don't get on a schedule. That really can mess you up when you say, I got to water all my plants right now. This is the day that I water all my indoor plants. Because some of them won't need it, some of them will need it, some of them might need it tomorrow but don't need it today. So we always kind of want to make sure that we don't get on a cycle. Water the plant when it needs it. And that's why I love that little moisture meter. The moisture meter works great. Oh, I'll lose it. My moisture meter always works great because you can always go stick it in there and say, okay, it's not ready yet. So always don't get on a schedule. I think it really helps to not do that. When we transplant our houseplant, so when we move our houseplant from a smaller pot to a slightly bigger pot, that's what we want to do. Go from a small pot to a slightly bigger pot. We usually want to grade up, what we call grading up from, let's say, a 6-inch pot to maybe an 8-inch pot. We typically want to go 1 to 2 to 3 inches, no more than that, in the size of the pot. And the reason is because indoors, soil, a lot of soil, is going to take a long time to dry out because there's no root system. We don't have a lot of evaporation indoors, we don't have a lot of wind, and we don't have a lot of sun. So you're not going to lose the heat. And so the temperature indoors, if you got your AC on, or your heat in the winter time, where our temperatures are going to stay pretty consistent at like 70, 72, somewhere in that range. So that's typically what we're keeping our houses. And so the soil is not going to dry out as fast. So if I take a small pot and plant it in a big, huge pot, a lot of us think that's going to give me a big plant faster. Well, not indoors. So indoors, that really can cause a lot of problems because all that excess soil, all that extra soil is going to stay moist way, way, way too long. So again, it takes me back to that analogy of you standing in a bathtub for 2 days. Imagine that soil is going to stay so moist, there's no evaporation, there's no sunlight, there's no wind, there's not as much heat, and there's no root system. The root system isn't big enough to absorb all that moisture. And so you're going to end up causing root rot issues. So we always want to gradually grade up. So I bring that up during the watering just so that if you go to move one of your houseplants into a slightly bigger pot, don't go into a huge pot. Go slightly. Just grade up a little bit. That's how we want to do it. Indoor plants like to be root bound, like to have lots of roots and not as much soil. So it's important to kind of know that. So indoor watering. Let's talk about that a little bit. How do we water indoors? Well, we're not going to need our hose and we're not going to need our watering wand. But I've got a couple other little tricks. I love having small watering cans for indoors. This big watering can is kind of cumbersome. It's great for outdoors because you can transport a lot of water when you need it to take all around your home to water plants outside. These smaller watering cans are great for indoors. And I definitely recommend it because it's so much easier to get to a small plant with a watering can like this. And you don't have to worry about splashing or losing a lot of water. It's very, very easy to use. You can go and fill it up very easily, and it gets the water right to the source of the plant. So having a small indoor watering can is very, very good. We've got lots of different types. That's a nice metal one, so it actually will look pretty on a shelf. But you also have just plastic watering cans. This one comes with a little spray bottle for misting. As I mentioned, we don't want to get water on leaves, but there are some plants indoors that we might need a mister for. And again, we would tell you if that is one of those. Like tillandsias love to be misted. Orchids, different types of plants that might need a little bit of humidity is what we're giving it with a mister. And we're trying not to spread disease, but sometimes a mister is a good idea to have. But plastic watering cans are great. Just something small that's easy to use around the home. I think that's very, very important. Let's see. So what else? Saucers. Let me go back to the saucer again. So saucers indoors, again, are to protect your furniture. Sometimes you're going to get a pot like this one that has a built-in saucer. So it's got a nice little built-in saucer right there. That's great. It's going to protect your furniture. Very easy to use. Sometimes you might need a little plastic saucer like this. These are almost invisible. They kind of disappear. So you can put this in there, protect your furniture, but if it fills up with moisture, go dump it. I love to take, especially my small houseplants, over to the sink, water them really well, let the water flush out, then go and take them back over to where they typically are going to stay. I think that really is helpful. And also, a lot of pots nowadays don't have holes in them, and they can act as a saucer. So you just take your plastic pot, you drop it into your decorative pot. It's basically a big saucer. It hides the plastic pot, and that's a great way of doing it as well. You can water in there. If that pot fills up, just make sure to empty it out in the sink. So just take your plant out, empty out the excess water, put your plant back in. You know it's got enough moisture. So that's what saucers are designed for. But there is another use for these, for indoors. If you have a plant that might need a lot of humidity, and we would tell you what those plants would be when you purchase one. You can take a saucer, fill it with pea gravel or rock, put a little bit of moisture under here, not so that the plant's sitting in it. The plant is going to actually sit on the rock, and then that'll create a bit of a humid situation around that plant. So that's kind of helpful too, is to use a saucer as a humidity tray. That's what you're basically doing. Putting some rock in there, a little pea gravel, a little marble maybe, fill it with a little bit of water, put your plant on top of it, and that's going to create a humid situation. So that's another use of a saucer. Now I want to tell you about these watering spikes, because these are some of my favorite little tips and tricks and tools that I love to use around on my plants. They're very easy to use. So let me explain these to you real quick. Clay is kind of a cool little thing. So when we talk about watering spikes, this is one that's called a Plant Pal. This is a wine bottle spike. So what this is, I'm going to pull it out of here so you can see it. This is basically just a clay spike. Now the nice thing about this one is you can put a wine bottle in here, you can put a 2-liter Coke bottle, you can put a plastic bottle, you can put a lot of different things in here. Of course a wine bottle will be a little bit more decorative. But what clay does is when it gets really, really wet, the pores in clay close up. They'll close up tight enough to hold water in here. So if this is super, super wet from the soil around it or from the water inside it, then it'll seal up. Now as the soil dries up outside, then the clay will dry up on the outside and it'll allow moisture to come out. So that's how these work. Very, very simple, very, very easy. Just a clay spike. This one's cool because you can put a wine bottle in it, as you can see there on the picture. Real easy to use. But then I've got lots and lots of different types, and I'm just going to show some of them to you real quick because I love these so much. This is that same kind of spike with a little mini bottle. So a great one for a little indoor plant like this. So these are great. And then we've got a slightly larger one with a slightly larger glass bottle comes with it. When we start to get into these larger bottles, you can use these outside too. So these are great for those containers that we were just talking about outside. They're awesome. So you can use these out there as well. So we've got those which are very functional. And then of course we've got some decorative ones too. So these are really cool. This one's a little glass bird that comes on the clay spike. So you can always add a little bit of decor to your containers inside or out and allow them to water your plants as well. And these work great. These really do work very, very well. Here's one that's got a fish. So kind of a coastal look. So we've got lots and lots of different styles of them, lots of different looks. Let's see, I've got a really nice fancy glass one. This one's really cool. So again, you can just kind of put the spike on, fill this with water, stick it in your plant. You've got an art piece in your plant, really pretty looking. So we can stick that in there. That looks really cool. And it's watering our plants. So really, really an awesome system. Great when you go on vacation, if you go out of town, or if you're just busy and you don't need to water your plants and you don't want to water your plants as much. These are a great way to water indoor or outdoor plants in pots. Awesome, awesome system. So let's see, I've got another little globe here. So again, really cool. Lots and lots of different options here that you can use. I want to show you one more that I absolutely love. These are something that took me a while to find, but I did finally find them. And it's a watering spike. It's made by this company called Bluemont. And Bluemont is a really kind of cool company that has developed these. They've been around for really a long time. We haven't seen them much in the States, but this is a really great idea. And so a lot of us maybe have seen these with some of the indoor plant gurus that are out there. But these are great watering systems. So let me show you how they work. I want to show you these two as well. So this is a 3-pack of just the classic, and this is a 2-pack of the extra large. But I've got one open here so I can show you how it works. So this is just the classic. So it comes with this tube, and you're probably wondering, how does this thing work? And I kind of wondered it too for a second there. But it's a really cool system. So what you're going to do is we're going to soak this. So we're actually going to take this cap off. We're going to take this little, what they call the carrot, but the little clay spike. We're going to soak this in water for about 15 minutes, get it really, really nice and wet. We're actually going to put some of that water, so I usually drop them in a bowl. So the 3-pack, I'll just drop in a bowl, get them all super, super wet, leave them in there for about 15 minutes, and then put your cap on, fill this with water from that bowl, get it nice and full, put your cap on, and then go put it into a plant. And you want to push this down so the clay spike is completely underneath the surface of the soil. So you want this plastic to be right at the top. You just push this down in a plant. Let me see if I can grab the plant to show you. Let's do this one. So we'll take this plant out. So I got my plant. I'm just going to take the spike and push it right down in the soil just like that. So now it's completely under the soil level. It's almost kind of hidden too. So that's kind of nice, so you can't even really see it. So let me see, there you go. But that's what you're going to do. Now it's got water in it, and then we're going to take this end and put it into a glass container. Now why glass? Well, glass is opaque, so it's going to allow the algae and stuff like that not to build up. But basically this has a little bit of a heavier base. So then this is your watering system. I can go fill this up with water. It gives me a lot more water holding capacity. I can do it this way. And this will siphon the water into the plant. And I'll explain this in a second on how Exactly how it works. You can also use a larger jug. So we've got a jug here. I can drop this down in. This is great for if you're using them outside or inside. Doesn't matter. You can put multiple into this one. So I can have this one jug full of water and it watering 3 or 4 different plants, that are nearby. So this is great for outside. This is great for indoor applications. These are awesome. So easy to use. So how it works is, let me put this down. Pull this guy out again. So how this works is, again, that same idea of the clay. The clay is going to, when you soak it for 15 minutes, the pores are going to close up, right? So the pores are going to close. Then as the soil around this, when we put it into the water, or put it into our soil of our pot, so when we put it into our pot, then this clay is going to begin to dry up as the soil dries up around it. And that moisture that's inside the water, that when we fill this up, right? So we're going to fill this guy up, fill this up with water, put the cap on, and then as that water gets pulled out of the clay spike, it's going to get pulled right out of the clay spike, then it's going to start to siphon the water through this tube to fill this back up. It's kind of a cool system. So if you've ever done like a water siphon, if you've ever had to siphon water, or hopefully not gas out of a car, but that's how siphons work basically. This is lower than this, so this is going to be down here in the bottom of the jug of water. This is going to be up in your plant. And then what's going to happen is as that water gets pulled out of the clay spike, it's going to start that suction that's going to pull the water through this tube. Really cool system. Works awesome. Love these guys. These are great. We sell them as singles, as individuals, and we sell them in the 2-pack jumbos and the 3-pack classics. They're both $19.99. They're awesome, awesome systems. Very easy to use. I love the fact that you can actually show it off. I think it's kind of cool to see, having a jug like this full of water and having these tubes going into it up on a shelf with all my plants. I think it's kind of cool. It's kind of a lot of people will say, what is that? That's really cool and that's very interesting. And so you can kind of explain to them how it works. Really cool system. And it's just a great way of watering our plants easily. It's going to keep our soil evenly moist. It's never going to water too much. It's never going to water too little. It's always going to keep our soil nice and moist. So that's why I love those watering spikes for indoor or outdoor applications. One of my last kind of tips for indoor plants is the turkey baster. So think about things around the home that you might have. Turkey basters I love to use, especially for terrariums. So if I'm watering in a terrarium, I can get specifically right down to the plant if I need to. So terrariums are a great tool, turkey basters are actually a great tool. Also, if I've got an attached saucer like this one right here, then I can actually go in there with a turkey baster and get that excess water out if I need to leave that plant there. Or if I've got a big plant. So if I've got a big floor plant and I got a saucer around it and I watered a little too much and I've got excess water sitting in my saucer, but I can't get that big plant moved, then I can use my turkey baster, suction that water out of the saucer, put it into a watering can or into a bowl or into a glass, go and dump it in the sink. And that way that big plant isn't sitting in a puddle of water, isn't sitting in its saucer full of water. So think about some of those things that you got around your home. Turkey basters are a great way of doing some little light watering. A lot of times I'll take my little watering can, I'll put a turkey baster in the top, I'll go around water my plants, and then sometimes I can pull that turkey baster out, get directly to a plant that I might need in a terrarium, but also suction some water out of a saucer if I've overwatered a little too much. So it's a great little tool to use around for your indoor plants. Alright, so that's how we water indoor plants and kind of containers in general. So now we've gone through our potted plants. Again, they're a little bit easier because our potted plants have a container. We know the water's staying right there. We know that we've watered it enough. Maybe we've watered it too much and we've let the water come out the bottom of the pot or the bottom of the hanging basket, and I challenge you to kind of fight that to kind of see if you can make it so that you're watering it enough, but you're not running water through it. Now let's talk about watering plants in the ground. I think this is a challenging one. This is very, very difficult for people to understand and for me to kind of explain too. So I'm going to try and do my best to tell you the best way to water plants in the ground. Now what are we talking about here? We're talking about annuals, perennials, vegetable plants, shrubs, trees, those different types of things. So those plants are going to need to be watered in the ground. The problem is we can't see in the ground. So like containers, we know the water's around the plant, we know the water's right on the root system. In the ground, we don't know that, and so that's what makes it a little bit more challenging. So what I like to tell you is take your time. This is going to take some time, but this goes back to my original comment from earlier, so I'm going to mention it again. Let's try and water deep less often. I want you to water more, water heavier, less often. So I want to encourage you to spend a little bit more time doing it, but then not do it for a little bit of time. So I hope that it actually will make you more efficient in watering. And so how much do you need to water? That's a tricky one. So what I typically tell you is, remember the size of the plant that you planted. Was it say a 6-inch pot like this, like an annual? Like a petunia or something? Was it a 1-gallon plant like this? This is about a 1-gallon size. Was it a 3-gallon plant? Was it this size? That's a big kind of landscape shrub. That's an azalea. But was it this size? So knowing the size of plant that you plant in the ground will help. And then what I typically say is water about 3 to 5 minutes per gallon size. So about 3 minutes for a 6-inch plant for an annual. About 5 minutes for a 1-gallon plant. So let's just stick to gallon size because I think that's easier to kind of understand. So a gallon plant needs 5 minutes. So a 3-gallon plant is going to need 15 minutes. So a 5-gallon plant is going to need 25 minutes, and so on and so forth. So it sounds like a lot of water, but I'm going to explain how to water in a second. So it sounds like a lot of water, but what we're doing is we're watering deep less often. So the best way to get a deep watering is, again, having a good hose. Let's make sure we got that good hose so we're not struggling to get that hose all around the yard. If we got a lightweight hose, it's going to make your life more enjoyable to water. But then we're going to use our watering wand. If I'm watering a 1-gallon plant, then I might just stand there, turn the thing that I love about this is it's got this on and off valve. So this on and off valve can help you regulate how much water comes out too. So if I turn it, 25%, 50% on, then you can turn it all the way off, but it allows you to kind of control the speed of the water coming out of the end here. And this end is going to come out, it's got a lot of little tiny holes in there, I don't know if you can see that, but lots and lots of little holes. It's going to come out in a nice little shower, which is really, really nice and easy to use. You can actually unscrew this if you need to. I typically use this. This is what we use around the garden center. We use this one. But if you need to get directly into something or maybe fill up a watering can or something, this is a great option to be able to take that off. But I usually keep the shower head on. We'll just screw that back on. And then what I'll do is I'll go right to the root system. Again, we're not watering the leaves. We're not watering broadcasting over top of the plant. We're going right down to the root system. And for a smaller plant like an annual, I'll just stand there for 3 minutes and kind of work my way around. And I'm not typically on full bore pressure. So if I've got a lot of water running out, it's going to be running all over the top surface of my soil. And so what I do want to do is get it so that it's going out a little bit but soaking in. And so I think that's important to know. If we're just sitting there watering the soil and it's just running off, because the soil is dry, that's when we're watering, is when it's dry, then all that water is just running off the top surface and running over to a different area. So typically you're going to see that. So we want to get our pressure right. We want to make sure that the water is not running and flowing all over the place. And then we want to make sure that it's staying in that area and kind of soaking in. When I go to water a shrub, a 1-gallon plant, maybe it's a perennial, could be an annual if it's a bigger annual, but a bigger plant, a bigger root system, and I'm going to water it, then I'm going to take my dram watering wand, and I'm going to lay it on the ground. I'm just going to lay it on the ground, put the root system, put this right down at the base of the plant by the root system, turn on the water so that it's coming at the right rate and it's going out and soaking in, but it's staying nearby the plant. And then I can leave it there for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. Go and do another little project real quick, go do some weeding, go do some different little pruning, some little jobs that I need to do, and then I can come back and move it to the next plant. So I know that sounds like a lot of water, but I'm only going to do this every 3 to 5 days. So, and that's what I want to talk about next. So we're talking about 3 to 5 minutes per gallon size of plant. So I think that's important to know is that we're watering enough. I'll also throw out there mulching. Mulching really, of course, helps. Whenever you water on bare soil, you're going to see the water running all over the place. If we have mulch, it helps kind of keep it in that spot too. I don't recommend making water reservoirs. You can do it if it's something that helps you for time, but eventually you need to eliminate that water reservoir. So what I'm talking about there is building actually like a ridge around your plants. A lot of us see it probably done with trees in different areas where you put this kind of water reservoir around it. The problem is if we get lots of rain over periods of time, it'll keep filling up and it'll be too much water for it. So for your needs, it might help initially for the first 2 or 3 weeks when we're getting our plant established. But for the long term, knock that ridge down, level it off, get it nice and flat, and that's the best way to do it. And then of course mulching of course helps. It's going to help keep that moisture nearby, and it's going to help keep the moisture in the soil longer. So for the long-term benefit of the plant, mulching is super, super important. But it also helps in watering. So when we're watering, make sure to put some mulch down. I think it really will save you a lot of heartache as well. So how to get a plant established in the ground. We're going to water every 2 to 3 days for the next 2 to 3 weeks. That's what I always tell people. It's very, very easy. I want you to water every 2 to 3 days for the next 2 to 3 weeks when you initially plant something. I want you to water deep, less often. So I want you to, when you water every 2 to 3 days, I want you to water very heavy. I want you to take your time, make sure you give a lot of water. Water it in the morning. Do it very, very heavy, do a lot of water, give it that 2 or 3 days time to dry out, and do that for 2 or 3 weeks, and then your plant should be pretty established by that point. Now, if you're doing it right now in the summer months, if we're planting right now and it's a little warm outside, we might be watering a little bit longer. If we're doing it in January, February, March, when it's a little bit cooler, then we might not be watering as much. So it all depends on the time of the year. It also depends on the plant. Some plants don't need as much water. If we're planting a yucca, let's say, or a cactus outside, then it's not going to need as much of that water. Maybe it's once a week, but again, we want to water deep. And the reason we want to water deep is because we got to get water all the way down to the root system. So I'm going to hold this plant up again so you can see. We got to get all the way down here. And so in a pot, we know it's in there. You know it's surrounded by, it's being contained. But in the ground, we got to get it all the way down to the bottom here. And that's hard for us to kind of grasp how long it's going to take for that water to get down there. And that's why I say 5 minutes on a slow trickle, not so slow that it's barely coming out, not full bore so that your water's running everywhere, but just 5 minutes on a good kind of pace. So again, that water's going out a little bit, but also going down, and you see it soaking in, and you don't see it running all over the surface. So that's how you're going to want to water your plants in the landscape. And let me bring up this azalea again so you can kind of see, again, how deep we got to get. We got to get this whole thing, this whole root ball moist in order to get it to establish. So we got to get this whole thing moist in a pot. We know we're getting it in the ground. We got to make sure we're watering enough. So this one I would do about 10-15 minutes at least. Give it a good water. Take my watering wand, just drop it right there at the base, and then we'll just sit there and leave it at a good kind of steady flow. Again, we don't want it kind of rushing all over the place. We just want it getting in there and kind of staying around the root ball and soaking in. And then if you do that for about 10 or 15 minutes, because that's a 3-gallon pot, then we should be good to go. And we do that every 2 to 3 days for 2 to 3 weeks, and we're pretty well established. Then we're watching it. So, okay, it's been a dry week. We haven't had any rain. Let me get out there and water it. We're also looking for wilting. So if we're seeing signs of wilting, then we need to go and water it. Once you get the plant through an entire year, especially trees and shrubs, and even perennials, once we get that plant through an entire year, then we're pretty well established. We shouldn't have to worry about it again. The only time we're worried about it again is if we're going through extreme dry periods or a drought, or if it's a Japanese maple or a specific plant that might need a little bit more moisture. So let's talk about those real quick. So a Japanese maple with those big, those burgundy leaves out there in full sun, if it's been a really, really hot week, let's say it's been in the 90s for a week, we haven't had any rain, might not be a bad idea to go out there and water it. I will tell you, it's very difficult to overwater a plant when it's that hot. So it's not going to hate you for going out there and watering it when it's been 90 degrees and we haven't had any rain. So it's not a bad idea to go out there and water it, especially some of your specimen plants. Also conifers. So that's why I brought this gold mop cypress in here, and hollies. There's a couple other plants out there that won't wilt. They won't tell you that they're struggling. So that's a hard thing, is all of a sudden this plant will just go brown, and it'll happen overnight. And that's because we just let it get too dry. So again, we've always got to be checking our plants, checking the root system, thinking about it, and saying, okay, I've had that plant in the ground for a year now, but I'm going through a really, really rough week here. It's been 90 degrees. It's been almost a week and a half. We haven't had any rain. It would be a good idea to go out there and water my landscape plants. It'll save you tons of money in replacing plants. It'll be beneficial to the plants. It'll help them grow, and they'll look prettier, and they'll benefit from it. So it's very, very important to do that. So when we're watering our in-ground plants, again, have a good hose. Have our 0G hose is my #1 recommended hose. Have your watering wand. Makes your life a lot easier. Save your back a lot of problems. You can just go down there. You can control the pressure, which is great. And then the last one that I want to show you is soaker hoses. So another good one, if we're establishing, so sometimes we're planting like a foundation planting. Maybe we've got 10 shrubs that we just planted in front of our house. And we don't want to spend, a bunch of time, 10 minutes on each plant. So that's what? I mean, that's almost an hour and a half just to water our shrubs. So a soaker hose is a good idea. So this is a soaker hose. Soaker hoses are a black hose typically. They've got tons of tiny little holes all over them that are going to seep out water. So it's not going to be like a sprinkler hose. This is a soaker hose, a little bit different. So sprinkler hoses are going to kind of spray water out. I don't love those because they typically are going to spray the leaves of the plants. But this one's going to seep out water in small little droplets, and they're going to soak the soil underneath it. What's really cool is you can wrap it around the plant, go back and forth, serpentine pattern through your plants. Really, really easy way of watering. You can connect extra hoses to it so you can make it longer. This is a 50-foot soaker hose. They're not real expensive. They're a great idea, especially if we've just planted, if we've invested, and again, like I said, let's say we planted 10 boxwoods in the front of our house. We've invested some money in that, and we want to make sure that we're watering them efficiently. What I also like to point out with soaker hoses is they do take a lot longer to water. So don't turn it on for 10 minutes and think that you got enough water, because it's barely coming out. So typically I'm going to run my soaker hoses for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So get up early, turn it on, get ready for work. Before you leave for work, turn off your soaker hose. Now, if you forget to turn off your soaker hose, not good, but you might consider getting a timer. So timers are a great little option. We're going to talk about this when we get to lawns, but timers are a great option. You just attach this to your spigot, you attach your soaker hose to it, set it for an hour, walk away, and you're good to go. So timers are a good option as well for that. So that's kind of how we water our plants in the ground. I know it's kind of tricky to understand, but again, I want to stress this. I'm going to say it one more time. We want to water deep, less often. We're pushing that plant, we're pushing it, we're stressing it a little bit to search for its own water. So we're watering it very, very deep. We're watering it very, very heavy. We got to get all the way to the bottom of that root ball. So we got to get all the way in the ground, 6, 7, 10 inches down in the ground to get this entire root ball covered in water. And then, as that's drying out, the root's going to search for water. It's going to dig in. It's going to be able to accomplish getting water on its own. It's going to get established faster. So we're going to water 2 to 3 times, or every 2 to 3 days for 2 to 3 weeks. That should get our plants fairly well established. And when we water deep. And we water deep less often. So I can't stress that enough for all plants in the ground. Water deep less often. It's very, very useful. I think it'll push your plants to look for water. It'll help them dig in, and that way they'll be established much faster. All right, so then the last one I want to talk about real quick is lawns. Because lots of us have lawns, lots of us are growing lawns, we want to know how to water our lawns. So let's talk about how we water our lawns. And I'm not going to get into specific types of grasses. I did a video on summer lawns. So we've got that on our website if you want to go and watch that. All of our videos are always posted on our website, mcdonaldgardencenter.com. So you can always go back and watch these again if you need to. But that video is on there about our summer lawns. And we'll be doing one on our fall lawn season as well. As I mentioned, we're in a transitional zone. We can grow zoysia, centipede, St. Augustine, Bermuda in the summer months. We can grow fescue in the fall, winter, spring season. Both of them are year-round grasses. They both come back. They both do very, very well. Fescue is the closest to an evergreen grass, and I think a lot of us grow fescue because of that fact, is that it's going to give us the most amount of green for the year. But it struggles in the summer months, and so we want to make sure we're watering. So I want to kind of give you a quick rundown on just lawns in general watering. So let's talk about seeding. When we seed our lawns, we got to water. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Again, we'll address these in detail in those lawn class videos. But we want to water 1 inch when we water. So we're going to put down our seed and we want to water 1 inch every single day, every morning. Again, morning. We still water our lawns in the morning. We want to water every morning 1 inch until it germinates. Now, how do I get 1 inch of water? That's a tricky one, right? Well, we want to use a tuna can or a Tupperware dish or a rain gauge. Rain gauges, as I mentioned earlier, are an easy little thing to have around. We put this out there, we turn our sprinkler on. You can use lots and lots of different types of sprinklers. You might have an in-ground sprinkler system. This is an oscillating sprinkler. You can also use a turret. Lots of different types of sprinklers out there. Whatever system works best for you, and again, we'll talk about more of that when we talk specifically about lawns. But any kind of sprinkler system works great. We turn on our sprinkler, we time how long it takes to get to 1 inch of water. Again, you can throw a tuna can out there, a Tupperware dish, mark off 1 inch, some sort of container that's not too big, that can hold an inch of water. We're going to time how long it takes to fill up that container. Once we have an inch, then we stop our stopwatch. We know how long it took. So maybe it takes an hour, maybe it takes 30 minutes, maybe it takes 20 minutes. Depends on the sprinkler, depends on the water pressure, depends on lots of different things. But once we know how long, we don't have to take the tuna can. We can take the tuna can, throw it away. We can keep put our Tupperware away, put our rain gauge up. Now we know how long to run the sprinkler. So if you're doing different zones, if we're doing, if you can't get your sprinkler to cover your entire lawn, then you can know how long to do it on each section, and we can move it around. But we want to water our seed every morning for the first, until it germinates. And that's typically 10, 14, 21 days, depending on the type of seed. But we're going to water until it germinates. Once it germinates, we're going to water for another week after that, every morning. So we're watering every day until it germinates. Then we're watering every day after that for a week after it germinates. And we're watering an inch every time we water. So we're going to do that. Then we're going to start to cut back. So it kind of goes back to my original point of pushing the root system to search for water. We're going to start to go to every other day for the week after that. Every third day, every fourth day, every fifth day, to eventually we're watering once a week. We want to water once a week, an inch. And so what I always tell people is if you got your own sprinkler system, if you got an in-ground sprinkler system, do the tuna can test, do the inch test, find out how long it takes to get to an inch of water. And then push your grass to search for water, especially when we're getting a grass system established. So if we're planting fescue this fall season, then I'll talk about it at length in that video, but we want to push that grass to search for water. Most grasses can get a 3 to 4 feet deep in the soil. That's a very deep root system, but it's not going to go there. If you have a sprinkler, an in-ground sprinkler system, great, good, that's awesome, use it, but don't make the grass become reliable on it. Don't make that grass say, I've got a sprinkler system, it's working great, because as soon as that sprinkler system breaks down and you got to get a maintenance person to come and look at it, and it's down for a week or two, and that grass is sitting there saying, I can't take this, I'm not used to this, I don't have a root system, I expect to get my water, where did it go? Then we've got problems. So we still, even if you've got an in-ground sprinkler system, I still push you to stress that grass out a little bit. Push it to search for its own water. It'll help you in the long run to develop a very deep root system. Lawns can survive on their own with just Mother Nature. We just got to push them a little bit. And then, of course, watch them during extreme drought periods. So again, if we've got a week where it's been 100 degrees and it's been very, very dry, then go out there and give it a good soaking. And then we might do 2 or 3 inches of water. We might go really, really deep and heavy because we're only watering it once in a blue moon then. I mean, we're only watering it whenever we're in extreme dry periods. But we want to really push the grass to survive on its own. Now, fescue. A lot of people are saying, well, with fescue, I've got to water it all summer long or else I'll lose it. Fescue does need a little bit more moisture. Again, it goes back to that transpiration of saying, plants are using the moisture to cool themselves. But also, a couple tricks on fescue, and I'll talk about this in my lawn class. Fescue likes to be tall. It's called tall fescue for a reason. So the taller the grass, the cooler the root system. The cooler the soil underneath it. It'll shade itself and it'll keep it cool. And fescue can go dormant, just like a Bermuda would go dormant in the winter. Fescue can go dormant in the summer. So if it's gotten really, really hot by the end of August, sometimes you'll see fescue go brown. If it's standing up and it's brown, it's still alive. If it's laying down and it's brown, unfortunately we lost it. But that's kind of a quick rundown on lawns. Again, have a good hose, have something that's easy to get your sprinkler out to where you need it to be. Use an oscillating sprinkler, use a turret sprinkler, whatever you might have, an in-ground system. Timers are a great option, so you can always use your timer for your sprinkler. So if you got to turn your sprinkler on in the morning, you got to run to work, you can set your timer and you're good to go. We also carry, We also carry digital timers. So digital timers, this is a 4-zone, so you can actually attach 4 different hoses to it. You can set up your own sprinkler system, and then you can remove it because we're getting our lawns established and we don't need to water every single day. So, lots and lots of different options there. So I think we've kind of run through everything real quick. I'll do a real quick recap. We got to understand how to water, and in order to understand how to water, we need to know the 5 W's. Who? You. What? The plants. Where? The root system. We're watering the root system. When? Always in the morning, if you can. Why? Because of transpiration, because the plant needs moisture to survive, to get those nutrients and those minerals through the plant system. And then how? Lots of different options there. We got lots of tools to help you do this more efficiently. Get a good hose. The #1 tool that you could ever purchase that I think you could ever get is this dram watering one. You got to have one. It's the best thing out there. You will not see us watering here at the garden center without one. Why is that? It's the best tool. It really is. So get one of these. It'll save you a ton of time. So easy to use. Very, very great tool. So get a good hose, get a watering wand, have some watering cans around, maybe try some of these watering spikes. Love the little blue mat siphon system, the watering system. These are great. You can get a big jug of water and you don't have to worry about it for a long time. So think about some of your watering spikes. Think about your plants. Think about, put yourself in their shoes. That's what I always tell people. Oh man, it's been 100 degrees for 4 days and we haven't had any rain. My plants are probably struggling. Let me get out there and give them a watering. And when we water, give them a deep watering. Don't just go out there and splash them. Never water the leaves. Always water the root system. Give them a nice deep watering. They will thank you for it. You will be more successful if you do it that way. So I really hope this helps. And you've got a great tool right there on your hand, so you can always check your soil moisture. And we've got lots of tools here that will help you as well. So I hope you learned a great deal with this video. I know that's a lot of information. I'm going to go and answer all your questions now, and hopefully I can get to all of them. And if you take off, have a great day. I'm going to answer the questions, and hopefully you can stick around for that. But if not, have a great day. Enjoy the weather. I think I heard some rumbles out there. Looks like it might be getting a little bit darker, so maybe we'll get some rain. All right, so let's go through these questions here. So Donna, great suggestion, do one on full sun areas, plants that can survive. So we're talking kind of drought tolerant plants there. How to deal with chiggers. They're near our small creek and cause us to itch. So yes, we could talk about that for sure. Tick control, yep. Great suggestions, everybody, good. I also thought about mosquito control. So mosquito, tick, and chiggers, we could kind of do that all as one. So great suggestions, everybody. Everybody's throwing out lots of different suggestions. If you haven't seen all of our videos, you can always go to our website, because I see somebody saying how to do vegetable or flower container gardening. We actually did that, Bridget. On our website, you can go to mcdonaldgardencenter.com, and all of our videos are in there. And we'll continue to do more, especially container gardening. I could do a different container every single day of the week and still never cover them. So we've got some suggestions about deer. Let's see, see if we've got any questions here. So Sharon said, never knew about that, about the drip line. Yep, very important to know. That's where my feeder roots are. So, and I guess I should have put, this would be another good way of showing that, Sharon, is the drip line in the pot is going to be right on the edge. And so when we water, the water is going to get soaked into all that soil there, but the drip line's right here. So if we were only going to water one portion of this pot, it would be the outside, of course, or it would be right on the inside, I should say. But that's where all the feeder roots are. When we put this in the ground, if we go and we put the water right in the center, it's not where we need it. We need it out here. And again, we're kind of pushing that water to look for water. So if we kind of put that water out where the drip line is, then that root system is going to search into that water. If you know you're getting an afternoon storm, should you still water in the morning, Sharon? And I mentioned that kind of earlier. That is up to you. And what I will say is you can keep your fingers crossed and hope that it does rain, but I think we all know, especially in the Hampton Roads area, that we get a lot of storms, afternoon storms. They always say, I think every day, if you look at the weather forecast, our forecast is afternoon thunderstorms. Well, sometimes we get them, sometimes we don't. So I would say don't rely on them. Rain is never going to really cause a lot of damage. Now, we've had a lot of rain. I've lost some vegetable plants due to too much rain, unfortunately. But sometimes you can't control those things. But typically, rain is not going to be the reason your plant dies. So rainwater is just magic of Mother Nature. So it's great. That's why people collect rainwater. It's an awesome thing to do. But also, if we water in the morning and then we get some rain in the afternoon, it's not going to hurt the plants. If you say to yourself, these plants can make it to this afternoon, and maybe maybe we'll get some rain and it'll help, then that's fine. But if you don't get it, next morning, get out there and water first thing. Get it done. So that would be my answer there, is don't always rely on the rain. My joke is here at the garden center, we never do. My well-watered citronella plant wilts when the sun gets really hot, but once the sun passes, it perks back up again. Exactly. So it's probably just protecting itself. It's just saying, I've got too much surface area, I'm getting sunburned, just like us. We kind of, if we can put something over top of us, a cool cloth, then we'll protect ourselves from the sun, but also a plant can just say, I'm going to decrease my surface area, I'm going to get away from the sun as much as I can, and wilting, while it looks like it's dry, it's most likely that the plant is just protecting itself, especially if you watered well in that morning. How do I know when I've watered deep enough? So hopefully I answered that question. Again, that is a very difficult one, Elena, for me to answer, other than to say trial and error. Keep trying. Water as much as you can. 5 minutes for a 1 gallon size plant is about what I can tell you. 15 minutes for a 3 gallon. And then so on and so forth. But just water it good. And what I will say is if you water too heavily, but you let it dry out for 3 or 4 or 5 days, you're never going to water it too much, especially when we're hot. So now watch out if it's cool. So if we're watering in 40 or 50 degree temperatures, still water deep, but then you might not water for 6 or 7 days. So it just depends on the temperature. But right now, I can safely say that with the temperatures that we're going to experience here in Hampton Roads, you can water it pretty deep, and it's going to dry out over the next 3 or 5 days. And you can always test with your finger. It's a great way of getting out there. But that is a difficult one for me to put an exact number on because, again, there's a lot of variables. Evaporation, wind. We could have a really, really windy day tomorrow, and then that can really dry out soil very quickly. So always just kind of keep all these variables in mind. Your soil, if you've got sandy soil, it's going to dry out faster. If you've got clay soil, it's going to take a little bit longer to dry out. If you've got clay soil, when it does dry out, it becomes a brick. So then we got to loosen it back up again. So again, lots and lots of variables out there. This could really be, if I really wanted to tell you everything about watering, this could be a 4-hour kind of dissertation. So I won't go extremely into detail, but hopefully that helped with your question. With many vegetables requiring different watering amounts, how do you prevent overwatering, or is there a watering guide that can be used for common vegetables? So Kimmy, I'm sure there's watering guides out there. I don't have one per se, but what I will tell you is right now you're watering probably your summer crop, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, zucchini, watermelon, all of those. Beans, different types of those, peppers, all of those can require about a similar amount of water. And again, as long as we water in the morning and then we let it dry out by nightfall, then you're not going to run into any major issues. And watch your plants. And again, kind of push them a little bit. Push your plants to search for their own water so that you're not watering every single day. I mean, an in-ground vegetable garden, I have one. I don't water every day. I try and make it 3 or 4 or 5 days if I have to. So I watered yesterday because it hadn't rained since last Saturday, so it's been about 3 or 4 days. So I went ahead and watered because I knew the temperatures were getting hot. But I do mulch my vegetable garden. I think mulching really helps keep the moisture in. Mulching will help regulate temperature, regulate moisture as well. So I think mulching helps. Now raised bed gardenings are going to dry out a little bit faster. I didn't mention those, but raised bed gardens are going to dry out just a little bit quicker because they're above grade. They're going to heat up a little bit more. Moisture is going to work through them faster. It's a looser soil. All of those things. So again, lots and lots of variables. I could talk probably about just watering this plant for an hour. So lots of different variables out there. Lots of different types of plants do require different watering requirements. Know what they are. Use your finger to test. Use a moisture meter if you need to. Tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, zucchini, peppers, they typically all need a fair amount of moisture. Watermelon, they all need a fair amount of moisture to kind of produce those fruits. So hopefully that helps answer that question. My Dram watering wand coupled with my lightweight expanding hose works well. I love my Dram. Well, thank you, Angelique. I'm glad. Would you suggest using self-watering globes for hanging baskets? Yes, you can. For sure you can. I mean, something like this in a hanging basket would be really pretty. It's nice and lightweight. It's not too heavy. The downfall is it is glass, so I don't think I would use, the wine bottle in a hanging basket. It'd be too heavy. But something lightweight. We carry plastic ones too that would work great. So yeah, these are awesome for hanging baskets. You can stick it in the side, you can stick it down in the middle. Check your plants. A lot of our hanging baskets are 3 plants, usually 1, 2, 3, so you can usually get a nice right in the center. You can fill it up with water. These work great for hanging baskets. So yeah, any container works great. You can even use them in the ground. They tried to make a bigger one for the ground, but it never really worked. But this works great if you've got a raised bed. I love these for raised beds as well. These bigger spikes. You can put a 2-liter watering 2-gallon milk jug in here. You can put whatever you want. Anything that's going to be able to kind of get that moisture into the spike. It's going to fill up with moisture when it holds water. It's going to stop the water from going up or coming out anymore. So you can use these for any kind of soil. I probably wouldn't use these directly, this style, directly in the landscape. Now you could, what I would use there is I would probably use these guys and put 3 of them around a shrub, fill up my jug. So if I've got to go out of town, if I'm not going to be here and I just planted a plant and I really want it to survive, this company, Bluemont, actually makes a spike designed for landscape irrigation. It's a little bit of a different system, so it's not quite the same as this. It's more of what happens is as this dries out, it siphons the water out of your hose spigot and actually drops it around your plants. So it's a little bit of a different system, but kind of similar idea. This would not be a long-term solution, it would just be something short-term in the landscape. But in the ground, or in a pot, in a raised bed, in a hanging basket, for sure you can use all of those. Which is better, well water or city water? Eleanor, that's a great question. Well water is for sure better, I guess you could say, but it does typically stain because it's going to have iron in it, so it's going to stain your concrete and different types of things like that, walkways. So it can also have different types of things in it that maybe we don't know, so I would definitely say get your well water tested just so that you know what's in it. But well water is definitely very, very good for plants. City water is not bad, so it's not bad. And again, what I'm trying to do is urge you to push your plants to find their own water source through Mother Nature and by developing a bigger root system. Bigger root system can get to more parts of the soil, can get to the soil moisture that it needs, and relies less on you watering with city water. Now, another great tip is, of course, rain barrels. I didn't mention that. You can collect your own water through rain barrels. We carry rain barrels. You can also let your water sit. So I didn't mention that for indoor plants. I usually will fill up a 2-gallon watering can and let it sit until I need it. Because what happens is while it's sitting there, some of those things that we add to our drinking water will actually evaporate, like fluoride. So, too much fluoride for our plants can cause fluoride poisoning, and so we don't want to do that for our plants. So by allowing some of that evaporation to occur, it actually evaporates those things that we add into our water fairly quickly. So great recommendation for indoor plants is to let that water evaporate out of there. A little bit. So let your water sit for 24 hours, and that'll kind of keep some of the moisture out. Let's see. Doris says, thank you, this was more helpful than I thought it would be. I only have pots at my condo, but lots of them, and I have learned a lot. Good, I'm glad, Doris. Thank you for joining us. What is the price of the 0G hose? Great question, I did not mention that. These are $39.99. Can't beat that price, trust me. I've been all about, you cannot get this hose cheaper than $39.99, so I don't really run it on sale typically. It's a very, very good price, $39.99, and then the 100-foot I think is $79.99. But really awesome hose. You will love it. It is the best hose. Very lightweight, extremely durable. Won't snag on anything, never kinks. You'll love it, Eleanor. Sandra says, this was wonderful, very informative and well explained, well worth watching. Thank you. Good, I'm glad. So Patricia said, how often should you water with a soaker hose in established beds? So in an established bed, establish is the key word there. In an established bed, you shouldn't have to water much at all. You really should, those plants, now if you've been using the soaker hose over the past 3 years, then they might not be as established as you think, especially if you're using it once a week or something. They might get used to that. So then I would go to every other week. Then I'd go to once a month. Start to take that reliable source of water away from them a little bit so that they search for water. But if your plants are established and you've got a soaker hose on there, leave it on there for sure. You can leave it there for as long as you want, but only use it during extreme dry periods. So really when we get into extremely dry periods, if you see your plants wilting or if you see some signs of stress due to not enough water, then you turn your soaker hose on. Now for established plants like that, you're probably going to run it for something like 3 or 4 hours, enough to really get a good deep soaking. I know that sounds scary, but you definitely are going to need to water it for a fair amount of time for an established plant. For younger plants that you just planted, an hour, hour and a half should be enough. But for a very established shrub, like a 3 or 5, 6-year-old boxwood or holly, you probably are going to need to soak that thing for 3 or 4 hours to get enough water. But we're only doing it in extremely dry periods. We shouldn't have to do it. It should be able to make it through a week of 90-degree heat. Now, if we're in a week of 95, 100-degree heat, hasn't rained for 10 days, then let's go out there and water. It's not going to hurt it. Is once a month enough watering for indoor succulents? So great question. So Susan, once a month for indoor succulents, again, depends on what your situation is. If it's in a very high light area, which I would suppose it is, succulents can make it about a month. I typically say for succulents, let that soil almost pull away from the walls of the pot. Now, if it's in a combination of a bunch of succulents, maybe it's a terrarium, whatever it may be, then we want to make sure it goes very, very dry. So wet-dry cycle is the best I can tell you. Once a month sounds about right, typically, but when we water, we want to make sure we give it enough water. If we've allowed it to pull away from the side walls of the pot, we've created a brick again. And so we want to allow that moisture to kind of get back into that soil, loosen it up. Once it's loose, then we can water it, get enough water, and then it's good to go. So wet-dry cycle for sure on succulents, and that can take a while. They store a lot of moisture in the leaves. Probably the most important thing to know about succulents is don't water them too much in the winter. They're not using the water as much in the winter. But wet-dry cycle for succulents for sure. Let them go maybe a little bit more on the extreme dry side, and then make sure to allow that soil ball to kind of be able to absorb moisture, give them enough water, and then let them go for a long time. So it's hard to say exactly how long that will be. So Chris says, I use a soaker hose in several beds, full sun beds. What would be a good rule of thumb for the length of time and how often per week? I may have missed this. I had stepped away for a few minutes. Chris, not a problem. So soaker hoses, as I kind of just mentioned a little bit there, for established plants are slightly different. But for if I've planted some stuff and I've got my soaker hoses on there, I'm usually doing it, again, to establish plants, to get new plants established every 2 to 3 days for the next 2 to 3 weeks. How long? Typically an hour to an hour and a half is going to give you enough because, again, that water is not pouring out, it's seeping out very slowly. So it'd be like if I'm using my dram watering wand to water my plants and I just barely turn it on and I just got a little tiny trickle out there, that's like a soaker hose. But soaker hoses are watering 10 plants, whereas this is just watering 1. So if you've planted a lot of plants, soaker hoses might be a good option. Every 2 to 3 days for the next 2 to 3 weeks, about an hour, hour and a half each time. You should be somewhat established by that point, and then we're just watering if it's dry. So that's the only other time we're watering, and then we're still probably about an hour, hour and a half. Once you made it through a year, you can actually take that hose out and use it in a different location, or you can leave it in there and you can use it during extreme drought periods in the future. Lena said, what type of mulch for vegetable gardens? Good question. Really, you can use any mulch. Hardwood, cypress, cedar, pine bark nuggets, pine needles. So really all of them work. They're all going to make your soil a little bit more acidic. It's natural. All of our mulches are mulches locally sourced. All of our mulches are going to come from pines, maples, oaks, so are all going to kind of change your soil acidity. It's going to bring it down a little bit, so you got to watch out for that. But the cause of that is not going to outweigh the benefits of mulch. Mulch is always going to be beneficial to your plants. Like I said, regulates temperature, keeps moisture in the soil, makes your plants happy, makes your plants look better, keeps weeds out, which is great kind of to help, for again, another watering tip is weeds are going to get the water first. So if you got weeds growing around your plants, your vegetable plants, then they're going to get the water first, and then the vegetable is going to get whatever's left over. So we always want to kind of mulch. I really think it's beneficial. Then you just got to watch your pH, and we can bring your pH back up very easily using lime. Just to add, Chris said, okay, good. So Chris said these beds have annuals. So thank you for adding that in there. Annuals, probably somewhere around 30 minutes. So we don't need to water quite as heavily. And then, again, annuals you're gonna replace in the fall with pansies. So keep your soaker hose right there in place. But yes, for annuals, maybe not quite as long. I typically recommend soaker hoses for my trees and shrubs and perennials, but for annuals, it's a great way of watering. But probably 30 to 45 minutes. You should be able to cut your time in half there, and still only every 2 to 3 days. And then really only for 2 or 3 weeks. And then really we're only watering if we need to. And most of your annual plants are going to be able to tell you they're going to start to wilt. If they start to wilt, we need to up the amount of watering that we're doing. Maybe we need to up the time. If it's not making it through the entire day, for sure. But if it's not making it for 2 or 3 days, then we need to up the watering a little.